Hello and welcome to another edition of Fides Podcast. My name is Jerry Serino and I'm your host, and I'm here with talent on loan from Rush. So if you're an avid listener of mine, you know I'm here in Ohio. You know that my dad, as a state senator, was the sponsor of Ohio Senate Bill 83, in which among a number of things it did is to ensure the freedom of speech and the right to not be harmed or damaged or have your speech or your beliefs suppressed at our state universities. Sadly, it was controversial, although it was a phenomenal bill and it passed, and it is very well needed. My guest today is someone who needed that protection and got that protection from our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom. So Maggie DeJong was a college student who had her basic rights of freedom of speech taken from her, and thankfully, again, was able to be defended by, Alliance Defending Freedom, Matthew Hoffman, who's also here. So, Maggie and Matthew, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, well, this is it's a great story, but it's one in which, we wish we didn't have to tell, right? We wish this didn't happen. So, it's a very interesting, and I've read all about it and know all about it. But for my listeners, Maggie, share the basic story of what happened to you at university.
Yeah, so I was in my final semester of my 3-year graduate program for art therapy counseling. And, in learning to be a therapist, we engaged in classroom discussions in which we discussed current events and contentious issues such as race relations and Marxism, critical race theory, and the postmodern theoretical framework. And so I respectfully participated with the mindset that this was a marketplace of ideas, not an echo chamber for just one ideology. And so I was alarmed when I did receive 3 no contact orders. And these were essentially restraining orders that prevented me from having direct or indirect communication with these students, both on and off campus. And what they said is that there was no rule or policy that I had violated, but that I had to comply with these orders.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so, Matthew, if you want to add to this, so she is essentially punished, but not told what her crime was. Is that correct? I mean, besides the fact that they were basically telling her she doesn't have freedom of speech, but they also were not giving her due process, correct?
That's exactly right. The university issued these orders out of the blue with no notice to Maggie, and they retaliated against her just because of what she said. So, like you said, that's a double constitutional violation. It prohibits her speech. It retaliates against her speech on important social issues that we should all have the freedom to discuss. And it deprived her of her speech rights without giving her any notice of the allegations against her or the opportunity to defend herself.
Yeah, that's the other sad part, Maggie, is that you were going, well, what is it exactly that I'm accused of, and how do I defend myself, right? I mean, were you ever given that chance ultimately?
No, I wasn't.
So you get these accusations, you face all this. Thankfully, it turned out okay because you had ADF there to support you, and the university basically crumbled, right? Once they gave in, and once they saw the lawsuit, correct?
Yeah, so to go back to your first question there, we had to get involved and we had to send a letter to the university way back in early 2022 just to get them to even say, what they were issuing these orders on what basis they had to do that. And that goes right to the due process violation, where Maggie shouldn't have had to get legal counsel involved just to continue expressing her freedom on a college campus, a place that should be the marketplace of ideas. Ultimately, they rescinded the no contact orders after we got involved, but not before they had been in effect for weeks, and retaliating against Maggie for that. And so that led Maggie ultimately, and in partnership with us, to make the decision to file a lawsuit. And they tried to move to dismiss it, but the judge recognized that these are clearly established principles that no one should be punished for speaking in accord with their beliefs on a matter of public concern on our college campuses. And ultimately, then it led to the very favorable settlement that we have here.
Yeah. So Maggie, what in the world did you say that was so horribly offensive and triggering to these snowflakes on college campus?
I think that's why I was so alarmed when I did receive these orders is I just engaged in our discussions where we discussed very um, contentious issues, yes, of what was
Mhm.
going on. As therapists, it's important for us to discuss these things, but um, many things that a lot of people in our country believe, and so it was nothing that was too crazy or alarming. It was just what many Americans believe, but they were shutting down that view. And that was what was
Mhm.
concerning is that students should be able to express their views freely without fear of being censored, and that's what happened.
Yep. And how much of so you said that you engaged with conversation. How much uh of the engagement was on, for example, social media, meaning your private social media, which we all can say or post or repost or like things or dislike things. Were there complaints ultimately, do you think, based upon your that's the private stuff?
There were complaints on my social media, just my views that I was posting, but then just discussions in the classroom, discussions that were just in private messages with other students. I'm not sure if I can really narrow it down to how much for each,
Mhm.
but it was just views that I was expressing that were different from theirs.
Yeah. So I have to ask, and Matthew, you could probably answer this best. Is that how many cases are there where a left-leaning student has the same repercussion for voicing their opinions, either in a classroom debate, discussion, or on their social media? Does that even happen?
Uh, I think that's a good question. I would have to say the incidence is much, much lower. I think that in academia, unfortunately, one side has kind of become the orthodoxy and has been unfortunately picking winners and losers in this marketplace of ideas. And that's what
Mhm.
happened to Maggie, merely because she expressed a contrary view, she was retaliated against by her professors.
Yeah.
That's not to say that the opposite doesn't happen and that people with other views aren't targeted. But I think when you go up against the prevailing orthodoxy, you're gonna come into excuse me, conflict with that a lot more often when you have the Christian and conservative views that Maggie has.
Mhm.
So, while it may happen, I think it happens more frequently to people like Maggie, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think we need to recognize free speech for all. That in this marketplace of ideas, the most important things is that we are having these debates and dialogues, like Maggie was doing, engaging with others in good faith. So that we can kind of all come to the pursuit of truth and what our campuses are ultimately meant to be.
Mhm. Yeah, and we would be all of us on this call right now talking, and hopefully everyone listening would be equally as upset if a left-leaning student was told to stop speaking. And that's freedom of speech. That's what we want. And so how I would be curious to know, Maggie, what was it like when you had these discussions in the classroom in person? I mean, I remember in college, it was a long time ago, and we would sometimes have discussions in certain classes, and quite frankly, it was really good, because you not only you learned as a young person, you learned how to make arguments, you learned how to listen, you learned how to maybe if you didn't have an answer, you went home and you kind of researched it and tried to find the answer. I mean, it was really, really good for us. How did they behave towards you in the classroom?
Well, I think you bring up a good point that it is good for us, to engage in Socratic dialogue and really pick things apart. Um, and what I learned for myself is that having a minority of thought, I was able to really take what they were teaching and research it and
Mhm.
understand, okay, what do I believe, and be very active in my learning. And that's what it is to be in this educational system in the marketplace of ideas is getting different views and being able to engage them and further understand yours, hone in on yours or sharpen them. And so unfortunately that was not what was the experience. Instead, I experienced backlash and hostility, and being ostracized from people in my program. And so it was very sad because this is a learning environment, and that was not my experience at all. It was very hard. It was very difficult, and very challenging.
So when you were uh, the given your punishment for for whatever your violation was, because you weren't really told, what did you have to do? Were you even able to go to class, or what was the repercussions ultimately?
Well, I had to be very mindful on where I went on campus, where I went off of campus, and I just remained very quiet.
So I mean, you couldn't hang out at a restaurant or bar or at a party with anyone. I mean, like, what if one of those triggered people came to the restaurant you were already at? How did that work?
Mhm. That's what's concerning is that it was also off campus. So if I were to walk into a coffee shop and one of them was there, I would have to leave for fear of the repercussions.
I mean, I hope everyone's hearing this, because this is, if again, if it weren't for ADF, you know, that may have been what you would have had to stick with, right? If someone didn't either have nowhere to get legal counsel or support. And that's why ADF and groups like yours are so important, because people are going to say, well, I don't know what to do. And a lot of people go along with it because they don't know what else to do. And I'm sure you wanted to just try to get along, Maggie, with uh, your fellow students and the like. What has it taught you? I think that's an obvious question. Now that you're out in the real world, and if you're willing to share what you're doing now, I would love to know what you're doing. We were talking off camera about it, so I know. But if you're interested in telling everyone listening, what you're doing now.
Yeah. I think what it has taught me is that where my resolve is. And I have learned that when you love God, everything pales in comparison. And so, whatever happens, when I truly love Him, that's what I focus on. And so, it was difficult what I went through. It was difficult, the whole experience, but there was resolve and there was peace. And so, I remained in that. Um, and there's a quote by DeJong Bonhoeffer that I live by, and I think it's something that's carrying into what I'm able to do now with advocacy type of work. And it's silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. And I learned that in my program. When God would tell me to speak, I would speak, and it wasn't always fun. And um, I'm learning now in my job as a therapist to also that's also an opportunity for me to advocate for my clients. And I can joyfully say I am working in a place where I feel so much peace in this position, and I'm working with adolescent girls who have been sex trafficked.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that part of what you're doing. I was glad you were open to sharing it, because that's really fantastic. And if people are wondering, what you use art therapy for, obviously it's for circumstances like these young girls who are
Mhm.
sex trafficked. And I have to think, when I think about what you do, and your fellow students who were also going to school for the same thing, who would you rather have as a counselor? Is someone helping you through a traumatic experience such as being sex trafficked, right? Someone like you, who is open-minded, who's spiritual, or somebody who's offended by the existence of someone else's opinion, right? I mean, that's just me saying it, not you guys. It's just my opinion. But I think about how great and how important it is in a role or a job like what you do, to have faith, to be open and willing to listen and hear other people. You're going to be the best person suited to help someone through something like sex trafficking or anything else like that. So, again, just my opinion there. So Matthew, if we could, finish off with you, because obviously I'm hoping people are listening and maybe saying, "Hey, this happened to my kid, or it could happen to someone I know." How can they connect with you if they need your support?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we've seen this happen in a number of places across the country. We also had a similar case in Idaho about no contact orders being issued at the university there. So I would encourage you to contact ADF if this has happened to you or something similar, or you feel that your speech has been discriminated against. The best way to do that is to go to adflegal.org, adflegal.org. We have a very robust intake department. You can submit questions about a certain situation, facts, and we'll contact you. And if there is something there, we will have an attorney speak with you, and hopefully we can provide some help to you there. And I should note, ADF provides all representation pro bono at no charge to you. So hopefully we can help the most people that we're able to, and really change both the law and the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I had started off reminding my listeners that my dad, as an Ohio State senator, was the chief sponsor of Ohio Senate Bill 83, which was in place to ensure freedom of speech and protect people like Maggie and her beliefs. But it also was there to protect people who have the opposite beliefs, right? That's all it is. And we need laws like that, and we need law firms like ADF to help. And we also need strong, confident women and men like Maggie to stand up and fight when they're faced with this. So, Maggie, DeJong, appreciate you coming on. Matthew Hoffman from Alliance Defending Freedom, thank you as well for being here. I appreciate you sharing the story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, Jerry. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of Fides Podcast. Please check out all my podcasts and all the different podcast apps on YouTube, on Rumble, and on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on rightamericamedia.com and on whkradio.com/podcast. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.